You didn't think I could do it, did you? Noah's voice cut through the stunned silence, calm but sharp as every eye in the classroom turned toward Ms. Bennett. The final note from the piano still lingered in the air, but it wasn't the music that held the room captive. It was the truth no one had dared to say out loud until now. Noah Ellison didn't talk much in class. He didn't need to. He was one of those kids who moved like a quiet current through the school day, never loud, never disruptive, just always present, always observing. Most teachers liked him for that. Ms. Carol Bennett didn't seem to notice him at all. Every morning at Franklin Intermediate School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Noah took his usual seat by the window in room 204, second row, third desk from the front. His spiral notebook was always open before the bell rang, pencil perfectly sharpened eyes already scanning the day's warm-up question on the board. And yet Ms. Bennett never called on him, not when his hands shot up with the answer to a Civil War trivia question. Not when he'd worked out a whole-page analysis of the Louisiana Purchase while others were still trying to spell territory. She simply glanced past him like he wasn't even there. Ms. Bennett wasn't a cruel woman, not openly. She didn't yell, didn't berate students, didn't hand out detentions unless someone really earned it. She wore neatly ironed cardigans, walked with an upright posture that dared kids to slack off, and ran her classroom like a well-oiled machine. The favored students got knowing smiles and patient corrections. The rest kids like Noah just blended into the background. Noah didn't complain, not to his classmates, not to the guidance counselor, not even to his mom. Instead, he carried it like he carried everything else with quiet resilience. After all, it wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him. He had learned that people tend to assume the quiet ones don't have anything to say. That was fine. He didn't mind. Because when he did speak, or better yet, when he played, he made sure it counted. It was during a Tuesday afternoon history lesson when everything changed. The classroom buzzed faintly with whispers as Ms. Bennett flipped through her lecture notes on Reconstruction. Outside, the Louisiana sun pushed against the classroom windows, striping the floors with pale gold light. Noah tapped his pencil against the edge of his desk, not from anxiety, just rhythm. It helped him think. Miss Bennett cleared her throat and began her usual roll into the day's topic. But then without looking up, she said, "Noah, why don't you tell us what General Grant's strategy was at Vicksburg?" Noah's pencil stopped mid-tap. Heads turned. He blinked. She had never called on him before, not once all semester. But he wasn't about to let the moment slip. He sat up straighter. Grant's strategy was to lay a siege to the city. He wanted to cut off supplies and force a surrender without a direct assault. It took about 6 weeks. A few students raised eyebrows. It was a textbook-perfect answer. Ms. Bennett stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. She murmured, flipping a page. Correct. The lesson carried on like nothing had happened, but something had shifted. It was in the air, subtle but real. Noah noticed. So did a few others. Jamal Thompson, who sat behind him, leaned in slightly. "Yo," he whispered, "did she just call on you for real?" Noah gave a small nod. "First time." Jamal smirked. "About time." But the real surprise came just before the bell. As students began sliding their notebooks into backpacks, Miss Bennett said, "Noah, could you stay behind for a moment?" The air changed again. A few kids glanced back with raised eyebrows. Noah hesitated for half a second, then nodded and stayed seated. Once the room cleared, Miss Bennett sat at her desk, hands folded like she was about to deliver a performance review. "I overheard you in the hallway last week," she said, her voice calm and measured. "You were telling Marcus about your uncle, the musician." Noah frowned. "Yeah, he was a jazz pianist." Her lips twitched upward, not quite a smile. "Interesting. I assume you picked up a few things." "A little," he said slowly. "Well," she said, rising from her chair as it happens, "we have a piano in the back of the room." She nodded toward the old upright, half covered by a faded tarp. Dust settled across its keys like it had been forgotten. Noah turned to look at it, then back to her. So Ms. Bennett continued, "Tomorrow you'll play something for the class." He blinked. Why not? Her tone was light, almost mocking. "You said your uncle played. I'm sure you've got a bit of that talent in you." It wasn't a question. It wasn't encouragement. It was a test. No, not even that it was a trap dressed up like an invitation. She wanted a performance, sure, but not the musical kind. She was betting he'd freeze, stumble, Prove himself to be what she already believed, a background character, quiet for a reason? He could have said no, could have pushed back, but Noah just nodded. Okay. That night, sleep didn't come easy. He lay on his back, eyes fixed on the ceiling of his bedroom. The street lamp outside cast long shadows through the blinds, slicing across his walls like spotlights on a silent stage. His electric keyboard sat in the corner, but he didn't touch it. He didn't need to practice. The music was in him already. He thought about Miss Bennet's tone, so polite, so distant, yet laced with something sharp. He thought about the look on her face when he answered that history question. Not surprised, not impressed, just curious, like she was lining up pieces in a puzzle. This wasn't about music. It never was. It was about seeing if he'd break, if he'd fall apart in front of the class and prove her right. But she didn't know what she was asking for. His uncle had taught him everything he knew, not just about chords and improvisation, but about confidence, about how to walk into a room full of people who didn't expect much and leave them breathless, about how to turn silence into spotlight. The next day when Noah walked into room 204, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He could feel the whispers start before he even sat down. He's gonna play today. No way. Dude's like, what a piano prodigy now. Even Jamal gave him a look like, you sure about this? But Noah just opened his notebook like he always did and waited. The entire first half of class dragged. Ms. Bennett spoke about Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau, and the 13th Amendment. Noah barely heard any of it. Every tick of the wall clock pulled him closer to the moment. Then she closed her book. Well, she said, glancing at the clock, we have a little time before the bell. Noah, why don't you come up and show us what you've got? The room shifted. Students sat up. Chairs creaked. A few smirks, a few whispers. The old piano, once invisible, suddenly became the center of the universe. Noah didn't move. Not at first. He let the tension build. Then he stood slowly, notebook still in hand, and made his way to the corner. Every step felt heavier than it should have. The air was thick with something unspoken, doubt, anticipation, maybe even a little hope. He pulled the tarp back. Keys yellowed with age. One chipped at the corner. He sat down, his hands resting lightly on the wood. He didn't look back at the class. He didn't need to, because tomorrow hadn't started yet, but it was already his. The moment Noah Ellison pulled the tarp off the old upright piano, the whole classroom seemed to lean in without moving. Chapter 1 had ended with silence, thick, expectant, electric. That silence hadn't gone anywhere. It followed him like a shadow when he sat down on the creaky wooden bench. Dust particles floated in the sunbeams, slanting through the blinds, the piano's yellowed keys waiting like a test no one believed he'd pass. Noah didn't look back at his classmates. He didn't glance at Ms. Bennett. He didn't need to. He knew the smirks were there, quiet, skeptical. He knew some were waiting for him to freeze up, for his fingers to stumble, or the notes to fall flat. That was the expectation. That was the trap. But they didn't know what Noah knew. They didn't know he'd spent hours on that exact kind of bench next to his uncle, learning to pull emotion out of every chord, learning to make even an old piano speak truths it had no business holding. He took one deep breath, placed his hands on the keys, and began. The first notes came soft, deliberate, like a whisper, breaking tension. A slow, bluesy melody rolled from his fingertips, gentle at first, almost mournful. It was the same song his uncle used to play on Sunday evenings after dinner, when the world felt still, and the only thing that mattered was how the music felt. In an instant, the air changed. The usual rustle of gum wrappers and desk shifting stopped. Even the kid who was always bouncing his leg, Alex from the second row, sat still for the first time all year. Every head turned, every eye locked on him. Noah didn't play like a student performing for classmates. He played like someone telling a story through sound, each note a sentence, each pause, a thought held just a little longer to make its meaning clear. His left hand kept time with a steady rhythm, while his right moved with elegance and purpose, gliding across the higher octaves, bending emotion into melody. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was honest. It was the kind of music that didn't need to shout to be heard. Ms. Bennett, standing by her desk with her usual clipboard pressed to her chest, shifted slightly. Her arms were still crossed, but her jaw had tightened. She hadn't expected this. Not the ease, not the confidence, not the complete absence of fear. She had set the stage for a stumble, not a revelation. But what she had accidentally done, what she hadn't accounted for, was hand the spotlight to someone who had been waiting patiently in the dark. Noah didn't look up, didn't break focus, didn't pause for approval. He sank deeper into the music, his fingers dancing faster now, leading into a more complex section, one filled with syncopated runs and sharp transitions. He didn't hesitate. This was the piece he and his uncle had worked on the longest, the one that used to leave his wrists sore and his head spinning, the one he'd failed at more times than he could count before getting it right, but now it flowed from him like it had always lived inside his hands. Halfway through the solo, someone at the back of the room whispered, "Whoa!" Another muttered, "He's really good." The energy was shifting fast. The students who'd smirked when he stood up were now sitting forward, eyes wide. Even Jamal, who had once joked that Noah probably only played chopsticks, was staring like he'd never seen a piano before. The girl in the second row, Riley, always quiet, always sketching in her notebook, had stopped drawing entirely. Noah felt it too, the change, the gravity of the moment, but he didn't let it distract him. He leaned into the final movement, a slow, aching stretch of chords that built to something bigger. He added flourishes, allowed the melody to swell, then taper back into near silence. The final note lingered long and haunting, like a question left hanging in the air. And then nothing. A beat of silence so pure it was almost sacred. Then a single clap, and another. Then a wave. Applause burst from the room like a dam had broken. Some kids even stood up, not because they were told to, but because they couldn't help it. Jamal let out a long whistle. "Yo, what was that?" someone asked near the back. Even Riley smiled softly, mouthing something like, "That was beautiful." Noah finally looked up, and then Ms. Bennett. She hadn't clapped. She hadn't moved. She was still standing at her desk, arms folded, lips pressed into a line. But her eyes, they weren't cold. Not now. They were calculating, uncertain. She cleared her throat. "That was unexpected," she said, her tone clipped, almost forced. The room quieted again. Applause faded. A few students looked at her confused. The comment landed like a wet blanket over a fire. Noah turned on the bench to face her. His voice was calm, steady. "You didn't think I could do it, did you?" The question hit like a cymbal crash. Loud, clear, direct. Students shifted in their chairs. A few murmured under their breath. Ms. Bennett blinked. "Excuse me," she said. "You didn't think I could play?" Noah repeated, his gaze unwavering. "That's why you asked me." Ms. Bennett drew in a breath. "I gave you an opportunity to share a talent. That's all." "No," he said. "You gave me a chance to fail. You wanted the class to see it." More murmurs now, a ripple of quiet agreement. The energy in the room had turned entirely. For the first time all year, the power balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it. "That's enough, Noah," she said firmly, the edge returning to her voice. But he wasn't angry. He didn't raise his tone. He simply looked around the room, then back at her. "You wouldn't have asked Riley, or Jamal, or Mason. Just me." "Why?" The question floated in the air unanswered. Ms. Bennett's fingers curled slightly around the edge of her clipboard. "You didn't think I'd make you uncomfortable," he said, quieter now. "But I did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, charged. The kind of silence that made people shift in their chairs, suddenly aware of things they hadn't seen before. "Sit down," she said finally, voice tight. He stood slowly from the bench and walked back to his seat, not rushed, not ashamed. Each step was deliberate, confident. He sat down and opened his notebook like it was any other Tuesday. But it wasn't, and everyone in the room knew it. The rest of the period limped along. Mrs. Sir Bennett tried to resume the lesson, but her usual rhythm was off. Her sentences faltered. Her tone lacked the certainty it once carried. Students listened, but not closely. Eyes kept darting toward Noah, toward the piano. The room had changed. It would never be the same again. When the bell finally rang, students didn't just pack up, they lingered, whispered, stole glances. As Noah slung his backpack over his shoulder, Riley walked up and said, "That was incredible," then added, "You changed something in there." He smiled, nodded, and headed for the door. Just as he stepped into the hallway, Ms. Bennett called out, "Noah." He turned back. Her expression was composed, but her voice lacked its usual weight. "I hope you remember that this is still my classroom," she said. Noah tilted his head slightly. "I know," he replied, his voice even almost kind. Then he walked away. Because this wasn't her classroom anymore. Not completely. Not after what just happened. And he didn't need her permission to be seen. The moment Noah said "I know" and walked away from Ms. Bennett's final grasp for control, something in the atmosphere at Franklin Intermediate School cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a hairline fracture in glass that had been forming quietly for months now, finally visible to everyone. The hallway was still humming with post-bell energy, kids bumping backpacks and rushing off to lunch. But Noah felt a calmness settle over him, like sunlight after a storm. He didn't need to look back. He knew Ms. Bennett was still standing in that room, still trying to process what had just happened, still holding on to a version of authority that no longer held weight, not in the way it used to. Word traveled fast in middle school, especially when the story was too good not to spread. By the time Noah sat down in the cafeteria with his lunch tray, the whispers had already reached his table. "Yo, is it true you made Ms. Bennett look like she got schooled?" someone asked. "You really played like a pro," another kid chimed in, eyes wide like they were seeing Noah for the first time. Riley, the quiet girl who always kept to herself, slid into the seat across from him. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said matter-of-factly. "You didn't just play music, you shut the whole room up, including her." Noah didn't smile, not because he wasn't proud, but because the weight of what had happened was still fresh. "I didn't do it for that," he said. "I just wanted to play." "Yeah," Riley nodded. "But you did more than that. You made her listen. You made all of us listen. And that was the truth." In a school where so many kids had learned to keep their heads down to follow unspoken rules about who got seen and who didn't, Noah had changed the rules without saying much at all. Ms. Bennett, however, was doing everything she could to pretend the shift hadn't happened. The next morning, she ran her classroom with the same clipped tone and crisp posture as always. But her voice was different now, tighter, less certain. She didn't look directly at Noah, but she didn't ignore him either. It was as if she didn't know what to do with him, this quiet boy who'd revealed something she hadn't been prepared to see. And the students, they noticed. They noticed how she stumbled over her words a little more when Noah raised his hand. How she hesitated just a second longer before calling on someone else. How her usual rhythm, the same one she had relied on for years, was offbeat now, like a song she used to know by heart, but could no longer play without hitting a wrong note. Whispers floated beneath every lesson, quiet comments, side glances. They weren't openly disrespectful, but they weren't deferential anymore either. A shift had occurred, and though Miss Bennett tried to restore the old order, it was like trying to press a creased page flat. It never really smooths out. 3 days after the piano performance, as the final bell rang and students filtered out, Ms. Bennett called Noah's name again. He stopped at the door and turned slowly, his face neutral. "Yes, ma'am." She gestured toward her desk, waiting until the room emptied before speaking. "I wanted to remind you," she said carefully, "this is still my classroom." Her tone was calm, but her eyes were searching his, looking for submission for the version of Noah she had known before, the version she could control. But that version didn't exist anymore. Noah looked at her, his expression unreadable, then gave a single nod. "I know," he said again, the same way he had 3 days ago. Then he left. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't rebellious. It was factual. A quiet statement of understanding. And yet it rang louder than any argument could have. That evening, Noah walked home under the amber haze of a Louisiana sunset. The sidewalks were warm under his sneakers, the air carrying the distant scent of barbecue and magnolias. When he stepped through the front door of his home, the familiar sound of his mom humming in the kitchen wrapped around him like a favorite sweater. She glanced over her shoulder as he dropped his backpack and grabbed a glass of water. "You're quiet," she said. "More than usual." Noah leaned against the counter. "It's been a weird week." She wiped her hands on a towel and turned to face him. "Want to tell me about it?" So he did, everything. From the moment Ms. Bennett called on him in class to the moment he sat down at the piano to the final, I know that sealed it all. He told her about the silence, the applause, the questions, the shift. His mother didn't interrupt, didn't fill the space with commentary. She just listened, really listened, the way she always had when things mattered. When he finished, she let out a slow breath and said, "Sounds like you made her uncomfortable." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. "Is that bad?" She smiled softly and shook her head. "No, baby. That's called growth for both of you. Sometimes the truth isn't comfortable, and sometimes the only way people learn is by being unsettled." He thought about that for a long time. Long after dinner, long after his mom went to bed, he sat on the edge of his own bed, staring out the window, the glow of the porch light flickering against the darkness. Ms. Bennett had tried to box him in to define what he could be, who he could be, based on what she assumed. But now that box was broken. And even if she never admitted it, even if she never changed completely, she would remember. They all would. The next day at school, it became even more obvious. Students who had never spoken to him before, eighth graders, even nodded as he passed in the halls. Someone he didn't recognize high-fived him near the vending machines. "You crushed it, bro," they said. That was real music. At lunch, his table was fuller than usual. Jamal, Riley, and even Brandon, who used to snicker at Noah's quietness, now pulled chairs close. "You ever think about doing the talent show next semester?" Jamal asked. "You'd kill it." Noah shrugged, not out of disinterest, but because he was still adjusting to being seen, to being heard. He wasn't used to people asking him to take up space. Across the cafeteria, Ms. Bennett walked past with her lunch tray. Their eyes met. Just for a second, and this time she looked away first. That one gesture said more than any apology ever could. Because sometimes silence isn't about dismissal, it's about recognition. And sometimes the most powerful shift isn't loud or angry or public. It's quiet, unshakable, a recalibration of how someone is perceived. Noah didn't need her approval. He didn't need an apology. He had taken control of his own narrative, and in doing so gave others the courage to look past assumptions too. That afternoon, as he walked home again, backpack bouncing gently against his shoulder, sky streaked in orange and lavender, he passed by the corner gas station, where his uncle used to take him for root beer and scratch off tickets. The clerk inside gave him a little salute through the glass. Noah smiled and nodded back. It was a small thing, but so was the spark that starts a fire. Final lesson. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back with fists or shout for justice. He let his music speak, and when it did, it said everything. Because when you've been overlooked long enough, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to demand attention. It's to quietly, unmistakably prove that you were worth listening to all along. Noah Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a desk or storm out of class. He didn't argue or protest when he was overlooked, doubted, or quietly pushed to the background. What he did instead was something far more powerful. He let his gift speak for him. And when he did, it changed everything. The lesson here isn't just about music or middle school. It's about dignity. It's about what happens when someone who's been underestimated for too long finally gets a moment to show who they really are. So many of us at work, at school, and life have felt invisible. We've sat quietly, knowing we had more to give, more to say, more to offer, but we waited. Maybe because the time never felt right. Maybe because we didn't think anyone was listening. Or maybe because, like Noah, we were just waiting for someone to hand us the mic without realizing we could claim it ourselves. Noah's story reminds us that validation doesn't always come from the people we expect it to. Sometimes it won't come at all. And when it doesn't, the challenge is not to crumble, but to rise anyway. You don't need to yell to make an impact. You don't need to prove your worth to those who've already decided against you. What you need is the courage to be undeniable when the spotlight finally hits. And here's the truth: the moment you decide to show up fully as you are, with everything you've worked for, there will be those who try to minimize it, dismiss it, or pretend it didn't matter. But it will matter, because someone is watching. Someone is learning from your strength. And most importantly, you'll never forget that moment when you chose to be seen, even if others weren't ready to see you. So if you're listening to this today and you've ever felt like Noah, unnoticed, underestimated, or pushed to the edge, know this: your moment is coming. And when it does, don't hold back. Let your talent, your integrity, and your truth do the talking. That's how you change the story. Thank you for watching and listening to US Instructive Stories. We are deeply grateful to have you here with us, sharing in these moments that matter. If Noah's story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own worth, Please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, because the more we amplify stories like this, the more we remind each other that quiet strength is still strength, and being overlooked doesn't mean you don't belong. It means your breakthrough will be that much louder when it comes.